Hey guys, tonight is really a night for the ages one, where dirt clings to linen chamber pots lurk in corners, and cold water is not your friend. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a narrow, muddy village path. Thatched roofs above, pigs snuffling underfoot, smoke curling from chimney holes. A young woman hauls a wooden bucket from the village well, and the water sloshes with a sound that promises more chill than cleanliness. She isn't about to take a bath. Oh no, not tonight, not this week, not even this month. And soon, neither are you. You see, the Middle Ages weren't known for their showers. You might think, but surely people washed, right? And they did sort of. Just not the way you'd hope. In fact, most medieval women didn't bathe regularly. Some didn't bathe at all. And the reasons weren't just about convenience. They were tangled up in fear-faith fashion and a wildly inaccurate understanding of the human body. Fair warning. By the time we're done tonight, you may never look at a sponge bath the same way again. And if you're one of those, a bath a day keeps the doctor away types, well, you probably wouldn't have survived the 1300s. Don't forget to subscribe and share this channel with someone who loves soft bedtime stories. Tonight, let your mind drift along with us, and may this soothing story help you find the sweetest dreams. Feel free to drop into the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there, or just share how you're feeling tonight. Is your mind buzzing? Are your shoulders tense? Let it out. This space is for gentle thoughts and curious questions. Close your eyes if you like. Feel your shoulders drop and allow my voice to guide you into a calm, cozy world tonight. And here you are, now standing barefoot in the trodden hay of a medieval village. The year is 1343. You wrinkle your nose. There's a faint smell of wood smoke, horse dung, and something else you can't quite place. It's not awful. Just earthy, musky, human. The young woman with the bucket walks past you, water sloshing at her side. You follow her through a crooked wooden door, ducking beneath the low frame. Inside is her home. Stone hearth, creaky wooden table rushes on the floor. You glance around for a tub. There is none. She pours the cold water into a smaller basin and dips a cloth into it. She wipes her face. Not her arms. Not her legs. Definitely not her full body. Just a quick, brisk swipe under the chin. Then she hangs the cloth to dry and gets back to stirring the pot over the fire. Because here's the thing. Full body baths. They're dangerous. At least that's what people believe. Historians still argue whether ordinary folks ever had the chance or the desire for full immersion baths at all. Sure. Some evidence points to communal bathhouses in larger cities, but out here in the countryside, water is heavy, cold, and limited. Bathing means hauling it, heating it if you're fancy, and spending a good chunk of your day doing something that might leave you cold and shivering in a stone house with zero insulation. And if you've ever gotten the flu from sitting around damp for too long. Now imagine that in a world without antibiotics. There's also the idea that clean skin might actually make you more vulnerable to illness. Yep. Many people believed that your skin had tiny, invisible holes, and bathing would open those up, letting in disease. Warm water. Deadly. It loosens the pores. Cold wind or foul air could slip right in. A sweaty layer of grime. That's your immune system's first line of defense. Sounds cozy, doesn't it? You glance again around the young woman's home. No soap on the shelves, just a bundle of dried herbs, lavender maybe, or rosemary, useful for scenting linens or warding off moths, but not really for scrubbing. Outside, a rooster crows, even though it's long past morning. In the distance, you hear the gentle splash of water from the well as someone else draws a bucket. Not for bathing. Probably for the animals, or the bread, or the beer. You begin to realize in this world water isn't for washing bodies, it's for survival. And yet people don't walk around thinking they're dirty, because nobody expects otherwise. Smelling a bit ripe after a long day in the field or at the spinning wheel. That's just life. Nobody's dousing themselves in essential oils or eucalyptus-infused bubbles. The most indulgent bath many women might experience is after childbirth. And even then, it's less about comfort and more about ritual. Water warmed over flame, steeped with bitter herbs applied with care and caution. One quirky record from a medieval herbalist mentions sage and vinegar being used to freshen the underthings. That's not a bath. That's laundry. So as twilight falls on your imaginary village and the hearth light flickers against stone walls, you settle into the rhythm of a world where bathing is rare, brief, and frankly, a little suspicious. That young woman you're shadowing, she doesn't think she's unclean. She smells like the fire, the earth, and herself. There's dignity in that. A rhythm, a logic, a life built around different rules than your own. And as you sit by her fire, sharing the warmth and the scent of simmering cabbage, your modern sensibilities start to soften. No bubble baths tonight. Just the stillness of a world where water stays in the well, where cleanliness is a quiet internal kind of virtue, and where the chill of a full bath might feel far more dangerous than the dirt left behind. You're still near the hearth toes, warmed by the fire, watching the flicker of flame bounce off soot-darkened stones. That young woman, let's call her Agnes, has moved on to stitching a hem, the soft rhythm of her needle gliding through rough wool. You notice her sleeves are slightly soiled at the cuffs, the neckline of her gown smudged with something that might be flour or smoke. She doesn't seem to mind. You wonder, how did this become normal? When did people stop scrubbing themselves and start believing it might be better to stay a little well? Grimy. It starts in part with a terrifying idea. Nakedness is a gateway to sin. You pull your cloak tighter just thinking about it. In medieval Christian Europe, the body wasn't just a physical vessel. It was a moral minefield. The less seen, the safer. And nothing made people more visibly human than being well nude. For women especially, exposure meant danger. Bathing, particularly full-body bathing, required removal of layers, and not just physically. The act itself risked immodesty. Even a private bath could summon sinful thoughts and public bathhouses. Let's just say the church wasn't thrilled. At first, centuries earlier, bathhouses were commonplace in parts of Europe, especially in Roman-influenced towns. They were gender-segregated, and some even had hot water. Imagine it a luxury, a social event, a place to relax. But over time, especially in the high and late Middle Ages, their reputation became slippery. You step now into one of those fading bathhouses, a stone building on the edge of town with steam once rising from within. But now, the windows are shuttered, the doorway crumbling. The inside smells of mildew. And yet, once it was bustling. Women gathering, chatting, soaking in giant barrels or shallow pools, washing each other's backs, sharing gossip. And inevitably, That attracted the wrong kind of attention. Stories started to circulate. Bathhouses were dens of sin, of lustful behavior, of secret rendezvous. Even if a woman went simply to cleanse herself, she risked being seen, and worse, talked about. And in medieval Europe, being talked about could destroy your life. Gossip wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. So women pulled back. They stopped going. They stayed home. They bathed less. Historians still argue whether the church directly shut down all bathhouses or if it was a more gradual cultural shift. But the outcome is clear by the 14th century, especially after outbreaks of plague and fears of immorality. Public bathing had become increasingly taboo. And yet, bodies still sweat, dirt still sticks, life still gets messy. So you look closer at Agnes again. She's clean in her own way. Her hands are wiped regularly on her apron. She likely rinses her face with a cloth each morning. She might even wash her feet at night in a small basin if she has the time and water. But a full, luxurious bath, it's just not part of her life. Imagine this. You want to bathe. You live in a home without plumbing. To get water, you carry a bucket from the well, maybe 100 meters away. It's heavy. It spills. If you want it warm, you have to heat it over a fire, a slow, fuel-consuming process. And once it's hot, you'd better use it fast before it cools. Now multiply that by 5 or 6 buckets for a bath deep enough to sit in. Now imagine doing all that just to strip off your dress soak in a barrel in front of your family or neighbors, because privacy is rare and risk the raised eyebrows of those who think you're getting a little too comfortable with your body. Not so appealing anymore. Is it? There's also the issue of resources. Firewood is precious. Water isn't always clean. In colder climates, heating a bath could take half a day's fuel, and bathing could mean catching a chill, getting sick, maybe even dying. One curious tidbit in some medieval texts, women were warned not to bathe during their monthly bleeding because their pores were open and vulnerable to evil spirits. And if that sounds absurd, just remember that people in your own time once thought radium cured everything. We've all had our strange ideas. Agnes sets her sewing aside now and begins to prepare for bed. She pulls off her linen coif, shakes out her hair. She brushes it not with plastic bristles, but with stiff boar hair pins on a wooden handle. Long strokes, methodical. It spreads the natural oils through her hair, keeping it soft, almost shiny. A kind of dry cleaning medieval style. She doesn't undress completely. She loosens her belt, unlaces her gown, and climbs into bed in her shift. Not naked. Never naked. Being fully nude is rare, reserved for moments of necessity or intimacy, and even then brief, as she lies down on a straw mattress padded with sheep's wool. You begin to understand that in this world, cleanliness isn't about showers or soap. It's about order, modesty, ritual. It's not that medieval women didn't care about being clean. They did deeply. They just didn't define it the way you do. They protected their dignity. They upheld social rules. And they stayed out of the bath, not because they loved being dirty, but because being clean, truly nakedly clean, came at a price they weren't willing to pay. So, tonight, you rest beside Agnes, wrapped in the warmth of wool, the crackle of fire behind you, and the firm certainty that you'll be skipping your bath. Thank you very much. And you know what? You're just fine with that. You wake to the distant bleating of a goat and the clatter of hooves on stone. The dawn is pale and chilly, with a sky so washed out it barely qualifies as blue. Agnes is already up combing her hair and humming softly under her breath. The air in the cottage carries the scent of damp earth and yesterday's stew. She hasn't bathed, of course, but she doesn't smell bad. Just human. You pull on your cloak and follow her into the village proper. There's something you've heard whispered before. Something about bathhouses. The kind with steam-hot water, a bit of luxury. It almost sounded like a spa. Did such places really exist? You're about to find out. Down a crooked lane sits a curious stone structure. Its roof sags slightly, and vines have started creeping along its sides. You nudge the heavy door open and peer inside. It's dim and cool. The remains of wooden benches line the walls. There's a circular stone pool in the center, dry and cracked now, but once it might have been filled with steaming water. This was a communal bathhouse, and for a time, it was perfectly normal to come here. Women gathered here together, often on market days or holy days, shedding their clothes behind privacy screens or hanging them on pegs. They'd enter the heated rooms, pour warm water over themselves, or lounge in the bath, sharing recipes. Stories, sometimes even secrets. It was a place for connection, not just cleansing. But of course, where people gather, judgments follow. You can almost hear the echoes of those ancient whispers. Did you hear who bathed twice last week? She must think highly of herself. Do you notice who entered the bathhouse after sundown? Suspicious, isn't it? Over time, the line between a communal bath and something more decadent began to blur, especially when men's and women's bathhouses existed side by side or even gasped together. You can probably guess where that led. Rumors swirled. Public bathhouses became associated with vice. Some turned into unofficial brothels or were at least suspected of such. Even the innocent ones couldn't shake the reputation. The church began to frown. Hard. If modesty was a virtue, then public bathing, especially among women, must surely be its opposite. And so these bathhouses began to close one by one, either shuttered by edict or quietly abandoned out of fear. Historians still argue whether the bathhouses were ever really as scandalous as the moralists claimed. Maybe they were just victims of bad PR. Or perhaps a few unfortunate events, one nobleman's mistress caught sneaking out, one too many stolen glances, tipped public opinion into hysteria. What's certain is this. For medieval women, bathing became risky, not physically, but socially. You step over the threshold of that forgotten bathhouse and back into the street. You notice how people glance at one another quickly, cautiously. Reputation matters here, more than you could possibly imagine. To be thought wanton could cost you your place in the community, your marriage, even your safety. So instead of going to a bathhouse, women adapted. They washed in private. They didn't immerse. They wiped, dabbed, scrubbed their faces, maybe their hands, maybe their feet. Nothing more. Agnes tells you this in her own way. It's not that I don't like the bath, she says, with a small smile. It's just that no good ever comes of being too comfortable. Then she wraps her cloak tightly around herself, as if to prove the point. You pass an elderly woman sweeping her doorstep. Her eyes linger on you a little too long, as if already cataloging who you've walked with and where you've been. You suddenly feel a little exposed. There's a strange irony to it all. In a place where so many people lived, packed together, slept in the same rooms, shared food, and raised families, elbow-to-elbow privacy around the body, was fiercely guarded. Bathing wasn't just undressing the skin, it was peeling back layers of safety. So women opted out. Not because they didn't care, but because they did. You duck into a baker's shop as the smell of warm bread curls through the air. Even here, the baker's daughter keeps a respectful distance, her hands dusted in flour, her apron stained from the morning's work. You notice a small basin near the door, not for bathing, but for quick rinses, perhaps, after kneading dough or serving customers. There's a balance here, a kind of code clean enough to be respectable, not so clean as to seem indulgent. One quirky practice. Some towns had bathhouse tokens, little discs handed out by the wealthy to servants or poor women to encourage cleanliness. They sound generous, but they often came with strings proof of loyalty, or worse, expectations of obedience. A clean woman might still carry the scent of someone else's control. As you chew a piece of coarse bread, warm and comforting, you start to see the full picture. Bathing wasn't just about soap and water. It was about status, suspicion, surveillance. And in the murky warmth of those forgotten bathhouses, a whole society once gathered until the steam gave way to silence. You leave the silent ruins of the bathhouse behind its moss-covered stones, fading into the morning mist. The village stirs around you. Chickens, flapping hooves, clopping dogs barking at carts. And Agnes is back at her daily routine shoulders, wrapped in wool hair, covered beneath a linen coif. She smells faintly of dried lavender and firewood, but there's a deeper reason she and many women like her avoid bathing. And it's more alarming than scandal or modesty. You follow her past the market stalls toward the edge of town, where an elderly man sits beneath a worn awning surrounded by vials, herbs, and scrolls. The town's physician, or at least the one who thinks he is. His robes are dusty, his spectacles cracked. Still, the people listen when he speaks, and what he's saying today is enough to make your skin crawl, literally. He's reading from a well-worn medical text, quoting confidently, "Bathing opens the pores, and through these pores, corruption enters the body." He nods solemnly as though this is absolute truth. Everyone nearby nods with him. Agnes catches your puzzled glance. "He's not wrong," she says gently, at least not in his way of thinking. Because here's the thing in medieval medicine based on the ancient teachings of Galen and Hippocrates. The body was thought to be ruled by 4 humors: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Keeping them in balance was the goal of all health, and anything that shifted this balance could bring chaos. Bathing, especially in warm water, was believed to disturb the humors. It opened the skin, loosened the body's boundaries. Doctors warned that soaking too long could let in bad air miasma, or worse, create internal dampness. And internal dampness was considered a breeding ground for disease. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were universally held, or whether they simply persisted because no one had a better explanation. But for many centuries, this logic shaped everyday choices. You sit on a low stone bench beside Agnes, watching the physician mix something that smells of vinegar and thyme. She explains that women in particular were seen as naturally more moist, a word that now makes you wince, but was once considered scientific. That meant they were believed to be more vulnerable to imbalances, more susceptible to danger from heat humidity or excessive bathing. So while the idea of a long, hot soak might make you sigh with comfort for them, it was a medical risk. And not just for themselves. A woman who bathed too frequently might be seen as irresponsible, even selfish, wasting firewood water, or worse, inviting illness that others would have to tend. Better to stay dry and safe. There's a quirky little remedy you spot hanging from a nearby stall, a pouch of camphor wrapped in linen meant to be worn around the neck to protect the chest from chill after washing. It smells like something between pine and mothballs. People believed it could balance the humor's guard against plague, and maybe even keep demons away. All from a little scented cloth. You take a step back from the crowd and notice something. There are no cues for the physician's advice on cleanliness. He isn't promoting baths or daily washing. He's offering purges, tonics, leeches, even advice to bleed the forehead with a sharp quill to calm hysteria. Cleanliness in this world doesn't come from scrubbing. It comes from control. Control over the body, over impulses, over what enters through your skin or nostrils or mouth. Agnes tells you that when she does wash, she does it in pieces. A cloth to the face and neck, a second for the hands, maybe feet if she's been in the fields. But a full wash, only when it's absolutely necessary. Once she tried to soak in a copper basin after a particularly muddy week in spring. She caught a chill that turned to a fever, and for 3 days she couldn't stand. Her mother insisted it was the bath that weakened her, not the 3 hours spent barefoot in freezing water while planting onions. That memory stuck. Now she keeps her bathing simple and strategic. She cleans what shows. She powders what doesn't. And while that might seem ridiculous to you, remember this: their knowledge was based on survival, not convenience. They had no germ theory, no antibiotics, no Vicks VapoRub. A cold wasn't a nuisance, it was a threat. A bath wasn't a treat, it was a gamble. You look down at your own hands, imagining a life where water itself is a question mark, where each wash is weighed against warmth, health, modesty, and fear. You suddenly feel thankful for your warm shower at home, maybe even a little guilty for ever complaining about low pressure. Agnes walks beside you now, arms full of herbs, the scent of rosemary drifting behind her. She doesn't smell bad. She smells like the world around her smoke soil and time. You breathe in deeply. It's not perfume, but it is somehow comforting. You and Agnes are back within the cottage walls, where twilight begins to seep through the wooden shutters, casting golden beams across the straw-covered floor. A pot of pottage simmers gently over the fire, its scent of barley onion and thyme filling the air with an earthy comfort. Agnes hums as she folds linen and sets aside a sprig of dried sage wrapped with twine medicine, or maybe just a charm. You settle beside the hearth and glance at her hands. Dirt clings beneath her nails, and her fingers are cracked from the cold. Still, there's a quiet dignity in her movements, as if the grime carries a kind of grace. And in her eyes, no shame. Tonight, you'll learn something unexpected, something that might turn your understanding upside down. In the medieval world, dirt could be holy. That's right. For many religious women, nuns, anchoresses, mystics, cleanliness wasn't just low on the priority list. It was seen as a distraction from the soul's higher calling. You lean closer as Agnes opens a battered wooden chest, retrieving a crinkled page of parchment. The ink has faded, but the words are legible. A saint's story copied years ago by candlelight. It tells of a woman who lived alone in a cell, never washing, never grooming, offering her body as a vessel for prayer and suffering. She was revered. You blink, revered for being filthy. Yes, Because her filth was a symbol of her sacrifice, she denied herself the pleasures of the body, including comfort, warmth, food, and bathing to grow closer to God. Cleanliness might have been next to godliness for some, but for others true. Holiness lay in the abandonment of worldly pleasures altogether. Historians still argue whether these practices were common or rare, outliers, extreme examples of spiritual devotion, or cautionary tales gone too far. But records show many such women existed, admired for their stench, their sores, their humble refusal to wash. Saint Ledgardus of Iweire was said to reject even washing her hands. Saint Margaret of Cortona refused to bathe as an act of penance. Agnes seems both respectful and mildly amused by this. "I like the saints," she says softly, "but I think they took things a bit far." Still, their stories mattered. They shaped the way women thought about their bodies, about purity, about what it meant to be good. And in that world, the absence of bathing was sometimes interpreted as spiritual discipline. Even the Virgin Mary, often portrayed in immaculate robes, was rarely described as bathing. Biblical women weren't praised for their hygiene. They were praised for their humility, their modesty, their restraint. So religious women began to internalize that message, to deny the flesh, to wear coarse clothing and go unwashed. In some convents, bathing was allowed only once a year, if that. Some scholars even suggest certain abbeys discouraged bathing altogether unless it was absolutely necessary for health. And in a way, it made sense. Why indulge the body when the soul was meant to shine? You glance around the cottage and notice the icons on the wall: a small wooden Madonna, a carved cross, a candle that's been lit down to a stub. Agnes isn't a nun, but faith wraps around her life like wool on a loom. She prays at dawn and dusk. She fasts on saints' days. And while she bathes more often than an anchoress, she still treads carefully as if too much comfort might slip into sin. And there's something else, something even more subtle. To smell like effort, like labor, like life, the two became its own kind of virtue. Women weren't expected to smell like roses. They were expected to smell like toil, like hearth smoke, like honesty. One quirky practice. Some women wore relics, bits of cloth from a saint's robe under their clothing. These relics weren't clean per se, but that wasn't the point. They were sacred, and even if they reeked of dust or mold, they were cherished. Holiness, after all, didn't always smell sweet. Agnes smiles now and brings out her own little relic, a linen scrap from her grandmother's veil, pressed between dried lavender in a wooden box. She never bathed much, Agnes says with a chuckle, but she lived to 90, so perhaps she knew something. You begin to understand how layered all of this is. Bathing wasn't just a chore or a risk. It was a philosophical and spiritual statement. A mirror held up to one's morals, not just one's skin. You shift on your bench, suddenly hyper-aware of how squeaky clean you are in comparison. Would your shampoo-scented hair have drawn suspicion? Would your peppermint toothpaste be mistaken for alchemy? It's a strange comfort, then, to let go. To imagine yourself not scrubbing away the day's sweat, but sitting with it, letting it settle like a second skin, a badge of belonging. Agnes douses the candle. The room dims to the soft red glow of the hearth. Outside, the wind brushes the shutter like a lullaby. You're not cleaner than you were an hour ago, but somehow you feel lighter. Because maybe it's not the absence of dirt that defines you, but the presence of purpose. The fire pops softly as you nestle deeper into the wooden bench, the warmth radiating across your shins. Agnes sits nearby, humming again, her hands gently working a bundle of herbs into neat little sachets. Rosemary, lavender, thyme. Each one is tied off with red thread and placed into a linen pouch. These aren't for cooking. They're for masking the body. You watch curiously. She dips a pinch of powdered sage into a tiny dish, then rubs it gently along her collarbone. It helps, she says, as if that explains everything. And it sort of does, because in a world where bathing is rare, you have to get creative. Tonight, you'll explore the world of medieval fragrance, not glamorous perfumes in fancy glass bottles, but the clever, gritty, herb-stuffed arsenal of powders, pomanders, and perfumed veils that women used to stay presentable and preserve their pride. Agnes lifts a soft linen scarf, embroidered faintly at the corners, and shakes it out. Then she brings it gently to her face, folds it once, and tucks it beneath her chin. The cloth carries a soft, peppery scent, likely cloves. Worn close to the nose, it helps her breathe in something pleasant while out in crowded places, like church or the market. Imagine this. It's Sunday, and you're sitting in a tightly packed wooden pew beside people who haven't bathed in weeks, wearing wool, sweating slightly under the weight of their best garments. Someone sneezes. A child coughs. The air is thick. That veil becomes survival gear. You look closer at the pouches Agnes is tying. Some are meant for underarms slipped into the folds of a dress sleeve. Others are tied to belts or worn as amulets under the bodice. Every woman has her favorite blend. Some preferred dried rose petals and crushed mint. Others used myrrh or cedar shavings. Wealthier women might grind up imported spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, sandalwood, and mix them with powdered ambergris or musk. Historians still argue whether these aromatic rituals were born from fashion or necessity. Were medieval women truly trying to impress with scent, or just keep the smell of unwashed humanity at bay? Probably both. But one thing's for sure, they didn't rely on soap the way you do. Lye soap existed, sure, but it was harsh, unpleasant smelling, and not always gentle on the skin. Some women used it to scrub their linen undergarments or wash floors. Few dared use it on their faces, so instead, they turned to scent as camouflage. There's a quirky recipe you overhear from an older woman in the next cottage over a powder made of dried violet petals, powdered orris root, and a pinch of ash. It's dabbed on the feet of all places to keep away rot and wicked odors. Whether it worked or not is beside the point. The ritual itself brought comfort, a sense of control. Agnes lets you try a bit of her homemade softening dust. It smells like chamomile and lemon balm, with just a whisper of mint. She brushes it lightly behind your ear, using a small square of linen. The effect isn't dramatic, but you feel oddly soothed, like your skin has remembered something old and kind. You begin to notice how scent lingers in everything here, in the lavender sewn into pillowcases, in the rosemary tied to the doorframe, in the sweet-smelling rushes on the floor, replaced every few weeks to keep away fleas and foul air. Even the fire smells purposeful pine and hazelnut wood, with occasional bundles of dried sage tossed into the coals for their cleansing smoke. This isn't perfume as luxury. It's defense against illness, against judgment, against the ever-present stink of a world without plumbing. Agnes opens a small wooden case with a cracked lid. Inside is a pomander, a hollow ball of brass on a chain filled with crumbled herbs and resin. She sometimes wears it on feast days, she explains, or when visiting crowded places. A simple shake refreshes the scent. If someone nearby sneezes, she lifts it quickly to her nose, just in case the air carries death winds. Because yes, many believed that bad smells were disease. If the air was foul, you might fall ill. This wasn't superstition alone. It was pre-germ theory science. If something stank, it was probably dangerous. So masking your scent and the air you breathed was a matter of health, not just manners. And yet, amidst all this, there's a touch of vanity too. Agnes picks up a small hand mirror, the polished bronze catching the firelight. She checks her hair, smooths the edge of her coif, and dabs another puff of lavender powder at her neckline. Even in a world without daily baths, women still wanted to feel beautiful. You watch her and think about your own routine showers, creams, deodorant, shampoos, all of it designed to keep you fresh. But here, freshness is crafted by hand, scented by herbs, maintained through constant invisible effort. And honestly, it works. Agnes doesn't smell like a soap commercial. She smells like the forest, like bread, like sleep, like home. As she settles in for the night, wrapping herself in layers of wool and linen, she slips one final herb sachet under her pillow. Chamomile and rose. For good dreams, she says. You close your eyes and inhale deeply. It smells perfect. The rooster doesn't so much crow as scream. Morning in the village isn't gentle. It arrives with goats, bleating carts rattling, and a cacophony of clanging pails. You blink awake on a straw-stuffed mattress wrapped in a rough wool blanket, the scent of dried herbs still lingering on your skin from the night before. Your body's a little stiff, but warm. You're getting used to this. Agnes is already up and bustling, opening the shutters just wide enough to let in the smell of smoke and damp earth. She lights a small candle and places it by the hearth. No bath in sight. Today you'll see the inside of a well-to-do household, a place you might expect to be cleaner, fresher, maybe even fragrant. You step into a stone manor on the hill following Agnes as she delivers a basket of bread and herbs to the lady of the house. The wooden floors are polished. Tapestries line the walls. The air smells faintly of beeswax and cold stone. But not soap. Definitely not soap. In the corner of the kitchen, you spot a familiar object, a chamber pot. You're about to see just how strange things get when a society invests in toileting options, but not bathing ones. The chamber pot is where most business gets done. It lives under the bed, beside the chair sometimes, even in the hallway, anywhere you might feel the urge. Once used, it's dumped in a latrine if one exists, or out a window into the street with the infamous warning, "Gardes l'eau, watch out for the water." Now imagine a house that's well-staffed and moderately wealthy like this one. They have basins for rinsing hands and faces, perhaps even a rain barrel, or a copper pot for warming water. And yet, you still don't find a bath. Because the act of bathing, fully undressing, climbing into a tub, scrubbing your limbs, remains rare. Even in comfort, even among those who can afford the firewood and labor, there's hesitation. Historians still debate whether nobles bathed more often than peasants, or whether they simply had better ways to pretend they weren't dirty. Linen underclothes were changed frequently and laundered with vigor. Hair was powdered. Rooms were perfumed with dried flowers and resin, but actual baths? Not often. You follow Agnes up a narrow stairwell where the lady of the house, let's call her Lady Margaret, waits. Her dress is embroidered, her hair braided with care, and her skin, well, her skin looks just fine. She hasn't bathed in weeks, but she radiates poise and power. She accepts Agnes's bundle with a nod. They speak in soft tones about laundry, about herbs, for a rash, about how the cellar's a bit damp. Not once do they mention bathing. You spot a ceramic basin in the corner of the room sitting beneath a copper ewer. This is Lady Margaret's washing station. She might rinse her hands and face here each morning. A servant might warm a small amount of water for her to dab behind her ears. A cloth bath, if you will. But even Lady Margaret has never experienced what you'd call a real bath more than a handful of times a year. If that. One quirky letter you recall reading once described a noblewoman who bathed entirely only after childbirth and again before her wedding. That was it. So if even the well-to-do avoid bathing, what do they do instead? They clean everything around their bodies. You watch as servants scrub linen shifts and undergarments in cold water mixed with wood ash and stale urine, a powerful combination known for its ammonia content. This keeps the linens bright and relatively odor-free, and because these garments sit closest to the skin, changing them frequently gives the illusion of cleanliness. It's like laundering your second skin. There's a fascinating logic at play here. The clothes carry the dirt, so if the clothes are clean, you must be too. Agnes helps the laundress wring out a pair of shifts and hang them near the hearth. Steam rises from the cloth. The room smells like lye and smoke and chamomile. You step outside into the chill, walking through the back of the manor, where a small herb garden thrives. Sage thyme, lavender tansy, all used to scent linens, deter pests, and freshen breath. You spot a few strewing herbs like sweet woodruff and meadowsweet scattered across the floorboards of the hallway to release gentle fragrance underfoot. Even the floors are perfumed before the people. And if you're wondering about bathrooms, don't. There aren't any. There's the chamber pot, the garden ditch, and in grander homes perhaps a wooden privy at the edge of the property. But no toilet paper, no hand soap, just a damp cloth and a hope for the best. Still, the lady of the house holds herself with grace. Her hair is tidy, her smile warm. She doesn't feel unclean, because by her standards, she isn't. She changes her linen regularly. She rinses her hands. She brushes her hair with scented powders. She sleeps between clean sheets. That's what hygiene means here. You trail behind Agnes as she makes her way back down the path to her own cottage, passing two boys arguing over who gets to climb the apple tree first, and a shepherd brushing dried mud from his boots with a bundle of straw. Everyone is working. Everyone is sweating. No one is hurrying to the bath. Because in this world, the body isn't something to obsess over. It's a tool, a vessel. Something to be protected, dressed, respected, but not pampered. And as odd as it may seem, there's comfort in that. A quiet, grimy kind of dignity. A breeze stirs the trees as you return to the village, with Agnes, the path crunching beneath your feet, dry now, but still tinged with the memory of spring mud. The air smells of turned earth and damp wool, and every so often a sharper tang of smoke or livestock cuts through the calm. You're starting to notice things differently now, not with judgment, but curiosity. That man's tunic carries a yellowish patch at the armpits. The woman beside him has smoothed her hair with something waxy, and there's a faint scent of mint as she walks past. No one appears ashamed. There's no hiding. Because in this season, everything smells, and everyone knows it. Today you'll come to understand how seasons shaped medieval hygiene, how the cold months meant embracing the grime and warmer days meant cautious cleansing, or at least changing your underthings. Agnes leads you to the back of her cottage where 2 linen shifts hang on a crooked wooden line. They're damp and freshly scrubbed, steaming slightly in the midday sun. She nods to them with satisfaction. They'll be good for the next round, she says. You don't ask what she means by round, because it turns out in many households, clothes, not bodies, were cleaned in rotation, typically every few weeks, especially underclothes or chemises made of linen worn directly against the skin. Linen was breathable, absorbent, and most importantly, easier to launder than the person wearing it. In winter, washing these garments was nearly impossible. The water would freeze before it could be heated. Fingers numbed quickly. Clothes took days to dry, and wearing anything damp could mean weeks in bed with a chill or worse. So during the coldest months, people layered instead. More clothes, more warmth, and a slightly reduced personal odor radius. And once spring returned, so did washing days. There's a surprisingly charming ritual to it. Spring cleaning medieval style involved stripping beds, beating rugs, boiling linens with wood ash and soapwort, and hanging everything out to dry. Villages would bloom with sheets and shifts fluttering like flags of surrender to the sun. Historians still argue whether bathing also returned in earnest with spring, or whether it remained minimal regardless of season. But one thing's clear: spring meant at least the illusion of freshness. Agnes retrieves a small pot from her shelf, thick with a brownish paste, and opens it with a wink. Inside is a homemade mixture of crushed violet petals, goat tallow, and a hint of lavender oil. She dabs it on the inside of her shift near the neckline. It holds through the day, she explains, especially when it's warm. You wonder how anyone bore the heat of summer without bathing. And the answer is, they didn't not comfortably, but they managed. One quirky strategy: sweat management through herbal stuffing. Some women stitched dried herbs into the linings of their dresses, especially armpits, bodices, and hems. Others dusted their skin with ground bay leaves, or even clay, hoping to absorb moisture before it could ferment into funk. And if someone really wanted to impress, they might wear a fresh garland of herbs around the neck or wrist, not just for beauty, but as a sign that they were in bloom too. But winter, that was a different story. Agnes tells you how in the cold months, people tried not to remove their outer layers at all. Night and day, she might wear the same wool gown, swapping only her underdress or chemise when the weather allowed. It wasn't laziness. It was survival. Water was dangerous. The wind could sneak through any crack in the walls. Even washing your hands too frequently could chap them raw. And heating enough water for even a small bath required hours of firewood and labor. So you stayed bundled. You drank warm ale. You tucked herbs into your sleeves and hoped no one stood too close. And when spring finally came and the frost began to fade, everyone breathed a little easier, not just because the sun returned, but because they could finally scrub the past few months off their clothes. Not always their bodies, but their clothes at least. You walk with Agnes to the stream now. It's narrow and brisk, running cold and fast between mossy stones. This is where she rinses. She doesn't climb in. That would be foolish. But she might wet her feet, splash her face, shake out her hair, and as you crouch beside her, hands dipped in the icy current, you feel it, the sense of renewal, the sheer relief of cool water, even if just on your fingertips. You're not cleaner in the way you're used to, but you feel connected to the earth, the rhythm, the season. Agnes pours a little stream water over her hands and rubs them together. She dries them on her apron, not minding the splash marks the sunlight catches in her hair. She looks peaceful, because for her, this is enough. And maybe for now, it's enough for you too. You wander back from the stream, your skin tingling from the cold water, your mind still echoing with thoughts of herbs, linen shifts, and seasons that smell. Agnes walks ahead, a woven basket, swinging from her arm filled with wild onions and a bundle of clean cloth. Her stride is steady, but today there's something new in her steps, a subtle tension, a quiet bracing. Because today, you'll witness one of the least discussed but most defining parts of medieval womanhood, the monthly curse. The moment you cross the cottage threshold, she sets down her basket, leans her back against the wooden beam, and exhales. You recognize the look, tired, inward, practical. Not dramatic, just necessary. No one calls it menstruation here, not in so many words. It's referred to in whispers, the monthly flow, the woman's mark, the red tide. Every village has its euphemisms, and every woman her method of coping. There's no box of pads under the bed, no painkillers in the kitchen, and absolutely no plan for taking a relaxing bath. Agnes retrieves a folded cloth from the shelf. It's not soft or sterile, it's old linen cut into long strips. These are her rags, washed, dried in the sun, folded again. She soaks one end in vinegar infused with sage and marigold. Not just for cleansing, but to ward off odors, and if you believe the folk wisdom, protect against womb chill. This is medieval period care, improvised practical quiet. Historians still argue about the extent to which women in different regions used cloth moss, or nothing at all. Some sources describe women placing soft bundles of rags into their linen shifts and changing them as needed. Others suggest that in peasant communities, many women simply bled freely beneath their skirts, especially when working outdoors. Agnes wears several layers today: her linen chemise, a thick woolen kirtle, and a half apron tied high across her waist. With these, she can move comfortably and discreetly. She isn't ashamed, but she isn't eager to explain herself either. You sit beside her as she cuts new cloth from an old shift her hands precise practiced. This is her hygiene ritual for the month. It's not indulgent. It's survival and bathing, not an option. Water is avoided during this time, not just for modesty, but because of long-held beliefs. According to many medieval physicians, the female body was open and vulnerable during menstruation. Bathing, especially immersion in water, was thought to invite sickness, disturb the humors, or draw in dangerous air. Some even believed the warm water might increase the flow, making the cleansing process too vigorous. Others worried that if a woman bathed during her time, she might become infertile, or worse, draw evil spirits into her womb. Is it medically accurate? Of course not. But in a world without ibuprofen, heated bathrooms, or understanding husbands, such fears carried real weight. So, Agnes doesn't soak. She dabs. She rests when she can. She drinks tea made from nettles and yarrow to ease the ache in her belly, and she keeps to herself just a little more than usual. There's even a kind of quiet respect extended to her by the other villagers. They don't ask her to knead dough today. She skips hauling water. She's given space not out of pity, but out of tradition. One curious little belief: some women carried small dried apple slices in their apron pockets during their flow, not to eat, but as a charm to sweeten the blood. There's no logic to it, but it feels like care, and care counts. You peek at the hearth, where a clean rag steams gently on a flat stone. Agnes uses the warmth to ease cramps, placing the cloth low on her belly and curling beneath her shawl. There's no soft couch, no flickering Netflix episode to distract her. Just firelight linen and time. And yet it's enough. She hums a bit, resting her chin on her hand. Her body aches. But her world isn't spinning. This pain is ancient, expected, understood. What's astonishing is that she doesn't speak of shame. She doesn't hide, doesn't whisper to the walls. It's not a source of embarrassment, just a fact of life. And somehow that fact sits heavier in this room than it might in yours. Because here, there are no disposal bins, no heated pads, no supermarket shelves with 30 brands to choose from. Just cloth vinegar and the blessing of warm tea. Still, the logic holds. If your body is already taxed and open, why risk more? Why bathe, even briefly, in court exposure to cold water or damp air? Why risk imbalance? For Agnes and women like her, cleanliness during this time isn't about washing. It's about balance, rhythm, and protection. And when the days pass and her strength returns, she'll rinse her cloths at the stream, hang them to dry in the sun, and fold them away for next time. No fuss, no drama, just quiet resilience. You sit with her until the fire dies low, the smell of rosemary still drifting through the rafters. And in the hush of this room, you realize sometimes staying unwashed is the most careful, loving thing you can do for yourself. Outside, the village hums softly beneath the pale blue sky. Birds flit between the beams of half-timbered cottages, and a boy pushes a handcart filled with straw past a tethered goat. The world is in motion, full of effort and dirt and breath. And in the midst of it, you find yourself among the peasant women, the ones who live not in the manors or convents, but out in the fields. Today, Agnes brings you to the edge of the barley plots. She's joining a group of women who work from dawn till dusk, sleeves rolled skirts, tucked up fingers calloused and worn. You quickly learn they do not have time to worry about baths. You follow them into the field, the sun warm on your back. Within minutes, your boots are caked in mud, your arms sweat slick, and your hair clinging to your face. The women work through it all, wiping their brows on their sleeves, sharing a gourd of water passed hand to hand. No one complains, and it's then that you realize something essential in this world. Cleanliness isn't measured by scent or sparkle, but by stamina. For peasant women, hygiene is stripped down to its barest essentials. There's no energy to haul bathwater, heat it, and then sit in it. Not after 12 hours bent over rows of cabbage. So instead, they clean what needs it most: their hands, their faces, sometimes their feet. You see one woman pull a damp cloth from her pouch and wipe her neck. She wrings it out in a shallow ditch and goes back to work. That's her bath for the day, and it makes sense. Historians still debate just how dirty medieval peasants really were, Some records suggest regular washings with cloths and herbal rinses. Others describe a once-a-week routine, or less. But what's undeniable is that bathing for these women was practical, not philosophical. They weren't avoiding water because of church doctrine or humoral theory. They simply didn't have the time, energy, or privacy, and yet they managed. Agnes pulls you aside during a brief pause, motioning toward a small wooden bench tucked beneath an oak. From her apron, she retrieves a palm-sized cake, coarse, dark, and crumbly. It's soap, well, a version of it, made from leftover tallow and lye mixed with dried thyme and ash. It doesn't smell particularly pleasant, but it works. She uses it for her hands for laundry, and occasionally, if water is plentiful, for a quick wash behind her ears. Soap isn't rare, but it's harsh. Too much and it cracks the skin. So it's used sparingly, reserved for stains or scrapes or special occasions. One quirky trick you observe. A young girl rubs her hands with a slice of raw onion. It masks the smell of sheep dung, she says. Better to smell like soup than manure. She's not wrong. Another woman ties a ribbon of rosemary into her braid, not just for decoration, but so the breeze brings a little freshness to her nose when the wind shifts. These women are nothing if not resourceful. As the sun moves higher, they retreat to the edge of the woods for shade. Bread is shared, dipped in thick ale, and passed around. You sit beside a woman whose hands are stained from beetroot and mud. She offers you a bite. You accept it gratefully. And again, you notice no one here stinks. They smell of soil and sun and the labor of their day. There's sweat, sure, but it's honest. It's expected. It belongs. Bathing to them is a rare luxury. Something done only when the weather is right, the water is easy to reach, and there's time left at the end of the day, which there rarely is. You trail Agnes back to the cottage as dusk creeps over the fields. She rinses her hands in a small basin, wipes her neck with a damp cloth, and kicks off her shoes. Her feet are filthy. She laughs and pours a bit of warm water from a kettle into a bowl. Her bath consists of a splash, a scrub with her fingers, and a soft towel. It takes less than 2 minutes. And yet she emerges from it visibly lighter. Because even the smallest act of cleansing in a world this demanding feels like a gift. There's dignity in this ritual. It may not be the scented bathwater you know, or the lather of modern shampoo, but it's something deeper. It's the care of someone who knows her body, her time, her limits. She pulls on a fresh shift, combs out her hair, and lights a single candle. The cottage is quiet. The smell of thyme clings to the folds of her sleeves. She is bathed in her way. And you, watching her from across the room, begin to understand just how much meaning a splash of water can carry when it's earned by hours under the sun. Night falls gently across the land, and with it comes a hush, soft, velvety, like wool against the skin. But not everyone winds down with the same rhythm as the peasants. Tonight, you step beyond the cottage, leaving the earthy simplicity of Agnes's world behind and into the perfumed corridors of a castle. Your feet echo on polished stone floors. Tapestries flutter in unseen drafts. Servants move in silence, bearing candlesticks and silver trays. The air is different here, thick with incense and the faint scent of beeswax polish. But once again, the unmistakable truth greets your nose. For all their silks and jewelry, these noblewomen aren't any cleaner. Welcome to the royal workaround, the elegant, deliberate art of avoiding bathing altogether. Lady Eleanor, tall and severe in her tightly laced gown, greets you in a chamber lit by tall windows and flickering candelabras. Her hair is coiled in a net of golden threads. Her skin is powdered pale. You'd expect her to smell of rosewater and luxury. Instead, she smells like wool cloves and something else, a rich, musky scent that clings to her sleeves. It's not unpleasant, just lived in. She hasn't bathed in over a month, and she has no plans to change that tonight. Historians still argue whether the nobility bathed more frequently than peasants due to their greater access to heated water and private tubs. But personal journals and household accounts often reveal the same patterns: ritual cleansing, frequent linen changes, heavy perfume, but very few actual baths. Why? Because even with servants to draw the water heat, the coals scrub the floors and dry the towels, the fear of illness still loomed. Those same theories about open pores, humoral imbalance, and vaporous miasma plagued the highest courts, just as they did the humblest villages. In fact, some noblewomen took even greater care not to bathe. It was easier to maintain appearances without risking exposure to cold stone, unfamiliar hands or the chill of drafty hallways. Instead, they relied on clever substitutes. Eleanor's maid brings out her cleansing tray, a silver plate lined with soft cloths, a small ewer of rosewater, powdered herbs, and a brush carved from ivory. One cloth is dipped in the scented water, warmed slightly by the fire, and pressed gently against Eleanor's neck. Another is used to wipe her hands and underarms. This is her bath, cloth by cloth, carefully orchestrated, quietly sufficient. You marvel at the intricacy of it. The maid never speaks, only gestures. She applies a powder of dried iris root under Eleanor's arms, combs out her hair, with a few drops of oil, scented with lemon balm, and then dusts her back lightly with what smells like violet petals and ground amber resin. It's all a performance, but also a necessity. Because here, image is everything. You're shown a wooden tub in an adjacent chamber covered with linen and rarely used. It's reserved for emergencies, after childbirth perhaps, or in the event of a lice outbreak. Even then, it would be filled only partially, and with herbs, added rosemary, marjoram, mint to strengthen the blood and drive away cold. One quirky detail you discover. Some royal women used fur-lined cloths to dry bathe, a form of wiping that was considered warming and luxurious. Sable fur was prized for this, not for fashion, but for friction. Lady Eleanor finally reclines her shift, spotless, her sleeves perfumed. She wears a velvet robe that brushes the floor. You realize now her cleanliness is measured not by water, but by layers. Clean linen next to skin, silk over that, velvet over silk, perfume on every layer. It's a kind of armor. Even her bedding is strategic, lined with herbs aired in the sun daily, shaken out to rid it of mites. Her mattress is stuffed with dried straw and rose petals, her pillows with wool and lavender. It isn't sterile, but it's well cared for, and that care is what matters. And there's another layer to this too: status. Bathing was labor-intensive. To bathe too often suggested you were unwell, perhaps even delicate. Cleanliness in this world was not about soap and scrubbing. It was about control. The ability to remain poised, composed, untouched by the mess of everyday life. The queen herself, rumor has it, only bathed once a year. And she wasn't unusual. You sit in a carved wooden chair as Eleanor's maid places a warm cloth into your hands. It smells faintly of chamomile. You wipe your face. The heat sinks in, soothing. You feel strangely cared for, because this too is bathing, slow, deliberate, fragrant, private. The night deepens. Outside, the stars wheel over the castle's high towers. You return to your own straw-stuffed bed, your hands lightly scented your skin, warmed by cloth and not water. And you think maybe it isn't about how often you bathe. Maybe it's about how much you notice the moments when you do. You wake in soft darkness, the castle hushed except for the rhythmic creak of wood and the distant coo of mourning doves nesting in stone alcoves. A thin shaft of light slices across the flagstones as a maid silently glides past, carrying a basket of dried flowers and bundled twigs. She doesn't speak, but the scent trailing behind her is unmistakable. Rosemary marigold, a hint of bay. Agnes, waiting near the gates to return to the village, nods at your puzzled look. "They're making herbal baths today," she murmurs. But not the kind you think. Today, you'll encounter the delicate balance between medicine comfort and suspicion, and how in the medieval world even something as gentle as a warm herbal soak could flirt with the edge of witchcraft. The manor steward leads you through a side corridor, down into the small room where preparations are underway. In the center stands a round wooden tub, only knee-high, lined with linen. Buckets of water are heated in a great blackened hearth and carried in by servants one by one, the liquid hissing as it's poured. Into the water, a woman sprinkles dried herbs from a muslin pouch, lavender sage marjoram, and rose petals. It smells divine, soothing, clean. You feel the tug of longing in your chest. But then the mood changes. An older woman, hunched and sharp-eyed, pauses at the threshold. She squints at the steaming bath. "That much rosemary," she mutters, "and before Mass strange that." The attendants stiffen. Because bathing with herbs, especially those associated with healing or fertility, has its risks. Not physical risks necessarily, but social ones. Add too many ingredients, chant a little too softly while stirring, and suddenly, you're not a wise woman. You're a witch. Historians still argue whether herbal baths were truly common, or if most were reserved for the ill, the wealthy, or the quietly brave. But many records describe midwives using these blends to cleanse women after childbirth, or to ease cramping, or to clear the blood. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't, but always they smelled beautiful. And that could be dangerous. In a world where fragrance was power, where scent was seen as spiritual, not just sensory, a bath that made you feel lighter, clearer, stronger, could raise eyebrows. You return to the village with Agnes just in time to see her neighbor Maud boiling marigolds on her hearth. "For my legs," she explains not unkindly. "They ache when it rains." She pours the steeped petals into a basin and rests her feet in it. Not her whole body, just her feet. That's often how these baths happen. In pieces. A foot bath. A cloth steeped in thyme to wash the face. A rinse of calendula and vinegar to brighten the skin. One quirky recipe Agnes shares involves boiling parsley and garlic, then breathing in the steam to clean the lungs. A medieval spa day, in other words, with strong soup energy. Still, they're cautious. Agnes never adds too many herbs at once. She never soaks too long. She always speaks plainly about her remedies, never calls them charms. Not since the widow 2 cottages down was accused of enchanting her washing water after 3 babies were born breech in one season. It didn't go well for her. You notice, too, how closely the church watches. Priests warn about vanity. They whisper about temptation. Bathing might ease pain, but it could also soften the spirit. Dull your penance, tempt you into too much comfort. Some monks believed baths made the soul lazy. Others insisted herbs interfered with divine will. So bathing with herbs became a quiet act of defiance, a way for women to care for themselves in a world that rarely did. Agnes brews her own bathwater that night, not for soaking, but for wiping her limbs before bed. A bit of meadowsweet and mint steeped in rainwater, cooled just enough to be gentle. You help her carry the basin to her bedside. She dips a cloth, wrings it out, and wipes her feet, her arms behind her ears. It's not luxurious. It's not even particularly thorough. But it smells like the sun-drenched hedgerows. It feels sacred, because sometimes caring for your body in secret becomes a kind of rebellion, a soft one, a tender one, but rebellion nonetheless. As the candle burns low and the room quiets, Agnes folds the damp cloth and tucks it into a bowl for the morning. She yawns, stretches, and leans back on her straw mattress with a satisfied sigh. No bath by your modern standards, but she's clean in her own way. She smells like herbs and ash and quiet hope. And as your own eyelids flutter closed, you begin to understand that even in a time of suspicion and scarcity, women still found ways to soothe themselves, to reclaim softness, to stir rosemary into water and pretend, just for a moment, that it's magic. Morning sunlight drips through the cracks in the shutters, soft and slanted, illuminating motes of dust that swirl like lazy fireflies. Agnes stirs beneath her blanket, the scent of dried mint still lingering faintly on the cloth folded by her bedside. Her hair is tousled, her shift slightly rumpled. But there's a freshness in the air, not from soap, but from stillness. Today, you're going to learn something that will likely surprise you. Sweat was once considered a shield. Yes, in medieval thought, your body's own odor wasn't necessarily a problem. It was protection. You sit with Agnes at the edge of her garden, watching her crush leaves of tansy between her fingers. She uses them to line her shoes. It helps keep blisters away, she says. As you speak, the morning warms and the world begins to exhale. Pigs grunt, roosters strut, children scream with delight over nothing in particular. And the air, it's ripe, not awful, just thick with life. Agnes wipes her forehead with her sleeve and shrugs. A bit of sweat's not a sin. In fact, in many corners of medieval Europe, sweat was seen as natural, necessary, even protective. It was the body's way of pushing out illness, of balancing the humors. If your body didn't sweat, something might be terribly wrong. Bathing, on the other hand, especially after sweating, was thought to strip you of that natural defense. You imagine it after a long day working in the fields. Your body is warm, your pores are open, your pulse still humming beneath your skin. Now imagine throwing yourself into a cold stream or wiping yourself down with chilly cloths. That might shock the system, leave you exposed. Some texts even suggest that sweat created a kind of invisible barrier, a humid halo of protection around the body. It might not smell great, but it kept corrupted air from settling in. Historians still argue over how seriously this was taken. Was it a widespread belief or more of a rural rumor passed from mother to daughter? But the impact remains. Sweat wasn't just tolerated, it was embraced. Agnes tells you of a healer in a nearby village who advises people to sweat out illness rather than bathe it away. She keeps a little hut by the edge of the woods where she builds a low fire and sprinkles wild thyme and fennel over the coals. Sick folk sit wrapped in wool blankets, drinking hot nettle tea, sweating from their temples. They call it the steaming, a rustic sauna if you like, but there's no rinsing afterward. The sweat is wiped away gently, and the person sent home to rest, pores still tingling, body fortified. You wouldn't find a bottle of shampoo anywhere nearby. And this philosophy even influenced the architecture. In some places, homes were built with low ceilings and narrow hearths, not just for heat efficiency, but to encourage warmth containment sweat. Dry air, too much bathing, and a cold breeze were the real enemies. One quirky tradition. You discover some people wore small amulets filled with their own dried sweat, believing it could prevent fevers if carried on the body during seasonal changes. It's not pretty, but it's deeply human, that instinct to make meaning from the mess of our own bodies. Agnes, meanwhile, has begun her mid-morning cleaning, not of herself, but of her linens. She scrubs her shift with ash soap, humming softly. Once dried, she'll pull it over her skin and feel fresher than any bath could make her. Because in her world, cleanliness means layers. Fresh cloth against the skin, sweat absorbed, not scrubbed. The outer grime can stay, so long as the underlayer is well cared for. And again, it's about balance. Too much sweat might mean illness. Too little a blockage. Women used herbs like sage mugwort or chamomile to manage this delicate middle ground, taken as tea or worn in sachets. Agnes drinks a small cup of such a tea now. It smells grassy, bitter. She doesn't wince. This helps the body know what to do, she says. You walk with her through the garden, watching as she wipes her brow, adjusts her scarf, and laughs at something a neighbor shouts. She's radiant, not because she's clean, but because she's at ease. She trusts her body. You begin to trust it too. And as the sun crests above the treetops and the day warms fully, the scent of rosemary smoke and even sweat swirls into something oddly comforting. Because now, you understand in this time, a bit of sweat isn't failure, it's function. It means you're alive, whole, working, balanced. And sometimes letting your body do what it was built to do is the cleanest thing of all. The heat swells as noon stretches its limbs across the village. Even the hens are panting now, resting in patches of shade beneath carts and hedges. A shimmering stillness hangs in the air, one that makes you want to splash your face dunk, your head fling open every shutter and soak in cool water until the sweat disappears. But today, no one bathes. Because this is not just a hot day. This is a time of plague. Agnes keeps her windows tightly shut. She's drawn the curtain across the doorway. A sprig of rue and garlic dangles from the lintel, bound with red thread. The air smells not of sweat and soil, but of fear. Today, you'll witness how a catastrophe changed the way people felt about cleanliness. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, it didn't just claim bodies. It tore holes in belief, in practice, in routine. And it left behind a permanent haunting suspicion of water bathing and even fresh air. Historians still debate the role of hygiene in plague transmission. Germ theory, after all, was still centuries away. But what people did know was that those who frequented bathhouses often became ill. Public baths, once places of modest comfort or guilty pleasure, were rapidly shut down. You walk with Agnes past one such bathhouse now boarded up and rotting. Once it had steam rising from it, laughter echoing from behind its walls. Now it is silent, forgotten. Because to bathe during plague time was considered foolish, dangerous, deadly. Doctors warned that hot water opened the pores, letting in the poisoned air, that miasmas, those invisible malevolent breezes, could slip into the body during or after a bath. Clean skin they said was vulnerable skin. So people stopped washing altogether. Agnes remembers her grandmother's stories of those years. Women stopped changing their linen. They stuffed herbs into their clothes, into their mouths, into their shoes. They burned rosemary and rue on the hearth and fanned the smoke toward the windows. One peculiar custom. Some carried pomanders shaped like skulls, filled with crushed cloves and ambergris worn around the neck to ward off infection. Not because the scent cured anything, but because it was believed to repel plague-borne air. You can still see the echoes of that panic today. Agnes folds her arms as she tells you about her aunt, who refused to bathe even once after a village outbreak. Said she'd rather stink than sicken. Agnes shrugs. And the woman lived into her 70s. In some cities, communal fountains were boarded up. Wells were abandoned. People feared standing water, shared buckets, even rain puddles. Barbers who also doubled as surgeons stopped offering washing services. They turned instead to bloodletting, to purging, to drying powders. Bathing, a symbol of human intimacy, of cleansing, of vulnerability, became associated with death. So, what did people do instead? They layered linen next to the skin, wool on top, perfumed sachets stitched into hems, and always a fear of letting skin go bare for too long. Agnes brings out a bundle from her chest. Inside is a shift her mother wore during one of the later plagues. It's yellowed now, but still faintly scented with juniper. She holds it reverently. She never took it off for 40 days, Agnes whispers. And she was spared. It wasn't just about superstition. It was about control, about doing anything to push back against the invisible. And even long after the plague eased, the habit stuck. Bathhouses never quite recovered. People grew wary of touch of steam of immersion. Bathing went from being suspicious to being taboo, and then simply forgotten. You begin to notice this legacy all around you now, the way people glance at each other when a breeze sweeps through, the careful way Agnes closes the window, even on a warm day. The way cloth is pressed against mouths in crowded spaces, not out of politeness, but out of ancient bone-deep reflex. One quirky recipe from the village healer involves a dry bath, a mix of powdered herbs and fine sand dusted onto the skin and brushed away with a bundle of linen. It's meant to clean without opening the body to air. And while it's questionable as far as hygiene goes, it feels safe. And maybe that's the point. In a world where bathing became a source of anxiety, people created rituals that felt protective. And in doing so, they reshaped what it meant to be clean. Not water, not soap, but routine. Fabric, fragrance, distance. You sit now with Agnes as she folds the last of her linen. She's not afraid of the plague anymore, not the way her ancestors were. But she still honors the customs. She still skips bathing when the air feels strange. She still lights juniper on feast days, because the memory of those years is woven into her world. And as you sit beside her, in the soft glow of the hearth, the ghost of steam rising in your imagination, you realize sometimes not bathing isn't neglect, it's history, it's survival. And it lingers in the air like rue and smoke and unspoken prayers. The night has fallen gently with the quiet hush that settles over a village well worn by the day. Agnes moves slowly now, folding her shawl over her shoulders, brushing the edge of the hearth with a birch broom, her movements soft and familiar. The fire is low, casting long shadows across the room, and the smell of the evening stew still clings to the rafters, leeks barley, and a touch of something sweet, like marjoram. You sit with her, feeling the weight of all you've seen, the rag washing the herbal pouches, the perfume-laced veils, the whispered fears, the plague-born customs. And now, at last, the final flickers of an era you've stepped into, like a borrowed dream. Tonight, you'll witness the beginning of a change, a hesitant return, a long-forgotten luxury made real again. Because as the centuries crept forward, bathing came back, not all at once, not with open arms, but gradually with suspicion, giving way to science and ritual, giving way to curiosity. And women like Agnes, or perhaps her daughters, began to reach for water once more. It started with small things. A new physician in the next town, speaking of clean air and bodily renewal. A traveler returning from the east with stories of steaming baths, scented oils, tiled floors that warmed beneath your feet. A merchant wife trying rosewater foot soaks and declaring it the height of sophistication. Historians still argue what truly sparked the shift. Some point to the Renaissance and its obsession with the body. Others blame the Enlightenment and the spread of scientific hygiene. Still others say it was simply comfort finally winning out over fear. But slowly, tubs reappeared. You follow Agnes as she visits a friend Marjorie, a widow known for her eccentric tastes and secretive grin. Her home smells of beeswax and dried citrus, and in the corner of her chamber, a wooden washtub, large, lined with linen, empty now, but reverently kept. She only uses it 3 times a year, Marjorie explains. Once at Easter, once at midsummer, once at Christmas. But when she does, she boils rose petals, tosses in cinnamon bark, and lights a candle so the shadows on the walls look like holy halos. She doesn't bathe to impress. She bathes to feel new. Agnes runs her hand along the tub's edge, thoughtful. I might try it, she murmurs. One day. And even that is a beginning. The tub isn't yet common, but the idea of it is no longer frightening. The fear of opened pores, of wicked air, of sin and shame. They're fading now, like mist in the morning. In some homes, women begin to rinse their legs after long walks, to soak their feet together and talk while the cloths warm by the fire, to allow themselves just sometimes the softness of skin newly scrubbed. One quirky trend you glimpse in the manor is scented bathing balls, little spheres of soap mixed with herbs, and wine pressed into shapes and gifted like precious fruit. The nobility passes them around laughing at their extravagance, but their popularity spreads. Slowly soap becomes something more than punishment for laundry. It becomes aspiration. Even Agnes tries it once. A sliver of soft soap gifted by a traveling merchant, smelling faintly of violet. She doesn't say much about it. But the next day she braids her hair and smiles longer at her reflection, because bathing never stopped being human. It was only hidden beneath fear folded behind superstition, bundled into cloth, and rinsed away piece by piece. Now it rises again, and you sitting beside the fire watching the shadows grow long, feel something stir, a recognition, a return. You understand now that cleanliness is never just about water. It's about rhythm, belief, survival, about choosing when and how and if to touch your own skin with care. Agnes snuffs the candle. The last of the fire hisses into embers. She wraps herself in her shawl and lies down on her straw-stuffed mattress, sighing softly. No grand bath tonight. Just the memory of mint on her sleeve and the hope of warm water someday soon. And maybe that's enough. And now, as the embers grow faint and the night settles fully around you, you let your shoulders drop. The fire is gone, the village is still, and Agnes sleeps with a quiet breath, the scent of dried lavender tucked beneath her pillow. You feel it now, that stillness, that gentle hum beneath the quiet world. You've walked through rooms where people wiped instead of washed, powdered instead of scrubbed, and cared for themselves in quiet, clever ways you hadn't imagined. You've seen how bathing was feared, avoided, mourned, and finally, slowly welcomed back. Let that image fade softly in your mind. The glow of candlelight on steaming water, the rustle of clean linen, the scent of rosemary drifting through the dark. It doesn't matter how often you bathe, what matters is how tenderly you greet yourself when you do. Let the story settle now like dust after the wind. Let the rhythm of old habits, old fears, and old comforts carry you gently towards sleep. Close your eyes if they aren't already closed. Breathe in once more deeply, softly, and as the world of medieval stone and straw slips away behind you, take with you this quiet truth. Even without baths, women found ways to stay whole. Even without soap, they stayed strong. Even in silence, they cared for themselves with all the gentleness they could spare. And now, you rest.